Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to TrackTime, your new favorite Formula One show. I'm your host, Michael Pales, and today we're going to be talking about Drive to Survive, the reality TV series that follows Formula One throughout their season. We're going to be talking about my 2026 predictions, and then talking about my predictions for the Australian Grand Prix, which is in Melbourne, Australia. So, also going to describe the new format. So we are going through, instead of 4 quarters, we have 3 sectors, Sector 1, Sector 2, and Sector 3. Those are going to be 15 minutes each, so a little bit longer, but we're going to be packing in a bunch of content in that time. So I'm excited to get going, and let's get it going with Sector 1. Now this one's not going to have any graphics or anything, but you know how it is. We're going to just get going. Let me start this clock. In the 15 minutes it goes. So, Drive to Survive released their 8th season, which is crazy that it's been 8 years since they've started Drive to Survive. Drive to Survive primarily has brought Formula One kind of on the American stage in terms of the number of people. I remember back in 2016, 2017 watching Formula One, and I never interacted with people that watched Formula One here in America. It was a very rare occurrence, and now you go out in public and you'll see at least one person wearing some form of Formula One merch, be it McLaren, Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes. You're going to see someone wearing some form of Formula One merch. And that kind of has been impacted by Drive to Survive. And this season was pretty good. I enjoyed it. It didn't follow... There were a couple teams that we didn't see any really highlighted, and one of them was Aston Martin. The other one was Haas. And so those teams that weren't necessarily highlighted, which it made me sad because Ollie Behrman, who was a rookie driver last season, and they talked quite a bit about the rookies, didn't really get his spotlight. I think he had maybe one interview and that was about it. But Esteban Ocon didn't have any interview inclusion. Same with Max Verstappen, and I believe Lewis didn't have any. So this Drive to Survive season was very interesting because we got to see a lot of focus on the team principles and, of course, McLaren, but no talk of papaya rules, which was very interesting. Papaya rules, for those who are uninformed, was this language that was used specifically for the Formula One season around McLaren, as they had 2 number 1 drivers. They have Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, and they used papaya rules as their rules of engagement while racing. And it was interesting that we never got to hear kind of what those rules were and how it impacted their drivers. But we did get to see kind of Zach Brown, Will Buxton, a couple of talking heads on, hey, this is the issue. They even brought in Nico Rosberg, who is another example of a team with 2 number 1 drivers. Nico Rosberg was at Mercedes originally back in before Lewis moved over in 2014, during kind of the turnover of regulations, where Lewis won 6 world championships. He won 6 world championships with Mercedes, and the 7th was Nico Rosberg in the 2016 season. And there was so much conflict inside the team because you have 2 number 1 drivers. You're not preferring one. You're not purposely making that advancement. And so it causes conflict because you have a dominant car and 2 drivers who are dominant drivers, and letting them go, it caused a lot of conflict. And it's very surprising looking at Oscar and Lando and how that really didn't bleed over, but I think that's because of who Lando Norris is. Lando Norris is someone who's though he does kind of wear his heart on his sleeve, he is very communicative in terms of, like, being classy. He had a lot of class. This was one of those championships that easily could have gotten dirty, could have had this big conflict between the drivers and a lot of back and forth, but it actually was quite classy, and I think that's because of who Lando Norris is and kind of how he impacted that. And you saw that kind of throughout the show, seeing Lando win the world championship and having those conversations. That then leads me to talking about kind of some of the backmarker teams, some of the teams that are not necessarily as good, and one of those teams is Alpine. I don't like Flavio Briatore. Flavio Briatore has a very long and infamous history with Formula One. He had a very big scandal, and a lot of things came out, and somehow he's been allowed back in the sport, and it's something that's quite surprising, but he truly has been playing the villain on Drive to Survive. And then we got to see Jonathan Wheatley, who's in charge of Kick Sauber, which is now the Revolut Audi Formula One team, and Jonathan Wheatley very much embodies kind of a coach. Like, I've been in football, so I've seen how, like, leadership changes, but Flavio is the, if you don't perform, you're gone. Jonathan Wheatley is the, how can we best make you perform? and it's a very different size of it. It's the coming alongside and working with your drivers to see that success. Whereas Flavio's like, I don't care if you don't succeed, I'm not with you. And we saw Jack Doohan get removed from the car and replaced by Franco Colapinto, who still was one of the worst drivers on the grid. It's not like they upgraded with Colapinto from Doohan. All that happened was Colapinto had less crashes, but even then, you didn't see it reflected. Pierre Gasly is really the only driver in Alpine that has succeeded, and it's just because Pierre has that experience. You had two rookie drivers in that position, so that was an interesting thing. I think the other thing that we got to follow was the Red Bull Racing Bulls driver swap between Liam Lawson and Yuki Tsunoda, and Tsunoda got flipped really early, and it was very interesting to hear Liam Lawson's perspective, because he said the interviewers asked Liam, what did Max say? And they were like, Liam didn't want to comment on it, and then finally said Max didn't agree. He didn't agree that they should have done that swap. And I think the hard thing is that I think that has hurt Liam Lawson's career thus far and could have a long-term impact, because he didn't get the chance to figure out his way with the car. He had 3 races with the Red Bull car, and then he got moved down to Racing Bulls, where Yuki Tsunoda took over for the Japanese Grand Prix. And it was really interesting looking into the psyche of that and how Liam functioned in that as that happened. So that was very interesting. Kick Sauber, I love Gabriel Bortoleto and kind of this, how he's a young driver, but Jonathan Wheatley truly is trying to grow him and develop him into a strong driver that can succeed for what was Kick Sauber and now is going to be, that was Stake F1 team Kick Sauber and is now Revolut Audi. Formula One teams, man, they have some of the most complicated names. But another interesting kind of storyline that they followed was the rumors of Max Verstappen going to Mercedes, and hearing kind of George Russell's kind of comments on it. And it's very interesting because the Mercedes F1 team currently has Kimi Antonelli and George Russell, and George Russell is clearly the number 1 driver at Mercedes. Kimi is a very young driver. It was very interesting to see, like, he got picked up from school by his mom, and this is as he has signed a contract to be a Formula One driver. He was born, he's younger than me, and that's kind of tripping me up as I'm now getting older, to where, these people that are playing in professional sports are younger than me, and I feel so old compared to them. And then I'm like, I look at them and they're just like, I understand what's going on, and I'm like, well, cool. Don't know where that happens, but going back into it, it was very interesting to see some of the rookies. They didn't really follow Isaac Hadjar, and that was something that was really hard, because I'm like, he had such a cool moment. He got a podium, and he was one of the drivers that was able to get the Racing Bulls onto the podium and kind of earn his spot at Red Bull, and they haven't really shown that. Every other season has been 10 episodes, and some episodes have dragged in those seasons when there's not much going on, but in this season, when you wanted it, when you had a 3-way battle for the championship, when you had a part where Oscar Piastri is going crazy, and then after Azerbaijan goes on a downturn while Lando Norris starts to take control of the championship, it was one of these seasons where you want to see more of that, rather than just, we got 2 episodes, 2/3 episodes following the McLarens. The Las Vegas episode was really cool, being able to see and follow the different teams as this was all happening, and getting the insight into how did the plank being not thick enough impact it. It's very interesting. There was a lot. I could not recommend watching Drive to Survive more if you're someone who's not necessarily familiar with Drive to Survive. It's a very good entry into Formula One. To get to know the drivers, get to know the teams, get to know who's in charge of teams. Jonathan Wheatley being in charge of Audi, and Flavio Briatore was acting team principal at the time, but not as much. The other thing is Flavio is in charge of the Alpine team, and he kind of fills that role, similar to how Zach Brown is the CEO of McLaren Racing, but is not the team principal, actually. It's Andrea Stella, who's the team principal for McLaren, and Toto Wolff, and now, what is his name? I lost his name, but the guy who took over after Christian Horner's departure, which was a very interesting moment. I am someone who has not been a fan of Christian Horner throughout his career, but it was really interesting to hear Toto Wolff's message to Christian Horner after his departure from Formula One. And obviously, if you're not performing in Formula One, it is a business. You need to succeed, and success does determine how much money you get. Unlike something with like the NFL, where the NFL doesn't pay the team and say, "Hey, here's your bonus for winning the Super Bowl or how you perform." Formula One, it's money. Your finishing position could be the difference in millions of dollars for your team's development. And that's why some of these battles between, oh, did we get 10th or 9th or 9th or 8th, those matter for those small teams. Now, certain teams do get what's called historical bonuses. So, like Ferrari, even if Ferrari finished 10th in the standings, they'd still make more than the 6th finishing team because they have a historical benefit, which is just a way of making sure that these teams that have been dominant and are historically strong teams still maintain some of that historical success and status. So, but getting into it, also interesting to kind of hear Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton and seeing kind of Ferrari and some of what they've done. But probably my favorite episode was the one following Williams and following Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon and James Vowles, who has been an exceptional team principal for Williams, and seeing kind of Carlos Sainz' first podium and him finally kind of kicking the curse of being not the best driver and him getting his first podium in Azerbaijan. But then they didn't talk about the other podium because he did have a second podium in Formula One, and that was a really, really cool podium that he got. And so I think that Drive to Survive performs best when it is a 10-episode season and not just a short season that's very compact and tight. It performs best when it is a 10-episode season. And sure, sometimes it drags, but you get to follow every team. You don't get these weird episodes where it's like, oh, Haas wasn't included. There wasn't necessarily an episode that followed Ferrari outright. It had multiple teams. You don't get to see the kind of inner workings of some of these teams and how these drivers think or operate. Ollie Behrman was one of the most successful rookies of this season, and they didn't use him whatsoever. And that's something that's really hard for me. I am a big fan of Ollie Behrman. I will say, I am a fan of Ollie Behrman. I think he's a fantastic driver. I think he's going to be so successful once he gets into other teams. And I think that this year, the Haas team is going to really give him the car to succeed. And Esteban Ocon is going to get shown up in terms of the best second driver. But I think that more and more as we watch Drive to Survive, as we see these teams operate and how they kind of function, it's really fascinating. And Max Verstappen has grown on me. I will say, I have been a Max hater for a long time. I don't like Max Verstappen. But more and more, I've started to gain a little bit of a liking to Max Verstappen. Mostly because I think you see how passionate he is about driving, but he has kind of been less bullish, less brackish, because he hasn't butted heads as much. But the thing that I also wanted to see was kind of the sad truth of, I wanted to see Lewis Hamilton and more of his struggles with Ferrari. He had so many struggles with Ferrari, but they didn't follow it, and obviously they didn't use any of his interviews. I don't know if he did interview or not. I don't know if that was one of those situations where he chose not to be interviewed. But, like, we didn't get to follow Ferrari beyond, oh, they're competing with Mercedes for points. And that was an important battle, but Mercedes kind of won it outright, and it was an important finish for Mercedes and the constructors because McLaren was so dominant, and it'll be interesting to see how Drive to Survive looks this year. We have a brand new regulation change. It is a completely different regulation from last year. Now, if you're curious or don't know what I mean by regulations. So, Formula One is a Formula Series. It's not a spec series. Spec series means that everyone gets the same kind of car. You can do some things, but everyone gets the same engine. IndyCar is an example of a spec series. Formula One, teams build and manufacture their own aerodynamics, their own engines, their own power units. Now, not all teams manufacture power units. Certain teams manufacture their own. Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull produces with Ford, Audi produces their own. And so you have all these teams that have their own, like, production of their engines, but then you have also engine manufacturers who buy different engines. And so McLaren showed up Mercedes with a Mercedes power unit. So there's some really interesting things with how this operates, but getting down to it, Drive to Survive is a fun intro to Formula One, and I think it was a very fun season. It was cool to watch. It was very digestible. It was a very short season compared to the other ones. What I will also say is that it is dramatized. There are things that are very much an unreliable narrator, using sound effects, using things like that to tell the story that they're trying to tell. And they showed a moment with Oscar Piastri and Zach Brown, and that was a moment that people were like, oh, they were leaning in on the, oh, Zach Brown might actually prefer Oscar Piastri. But if anyone has watched Formula One, they know that there is a relationship between Zach Brown and Lando Norris that is because Lando's been there for 8 years. Lando's been there through thick and thin. And Oscar is new, and Oscar will be a world champion one day. Will it be with McLaren? I don't know, but Lando got his world championship, and I know that Oscar will eventually get his. So, that finishes off Sector 1, quick one, as we now are going to get on in to my 2026 predictions. Let me start the Sector 3 as we get into my 2026 predictions right here. This is the FIA's like mock-up of the 2026 car. So, but first off, we're going to talk about my prediction for worst driver of this season. Who do I think is going to be the least successful driver this season? Who do I think is going to finish number 22 in this season? Oh, sorry, I have to click the wrong thing. Lance Stroll. So, a little bit of explanation as to why I think Lance Stroll is going to finish dead last in all the standings. And that, yes, I'm aware Cadillac is coming in as a team and is a brand new team, and almost every brand new team finishes poorly. However, Aston Martin has had rumors that they might not even have a chance of starting the Australian Grand Prix. And honestly, the worst driver on the grid in terms of talent, in terms of performance, in terms of success, is Lance Stroll. He is not a good driver, and he has bought his way into Formula One, and at this point, I think most Formula One fans would be glad if he was replaced in Aston Martin, but he won't because Lawrence Stroll, his father, owns the team. So, but that still leads me to believe that because this car is not very good, it means that it is going to exacerbate the issues that Lance Stroll has, and he's going to finish dead last in the Formula One World Championship. That then leads me to my next category, next prediction. And I'm talking about the best second driver. Now, some of you might be wondering, okay, what do you mean by second driver? And I mean, when there's a team with a clear number one driver, those teams being Red Bull, those teams being Alpine, those teams being... Really, there's only a few teams that have a clear number one driver. But like Red Bull, Mercedes is another example. Ferrari doesn't, McLaren doesn't. There are a couple of teams, but regardless, my pick for the best second driver, and that's kind of between Isaac Hadjar, Kimi Antonelli, Franco Colapinto, some of those drivers, those number twos. My pick is Isaac Hadjar. I think if anyone is going to break the second seat curse, it is Isaac Hadjar. He has shown talent. He was able to get a Racing Bulls a podium, and he has shown that he's an exceptionally talented driver, and he is someone that I think could get the most out of a Red Bull car that looks to be productive. And yes, you're always going to look worse when you're driving against one of the best drivers of all time in Max Verstappen. I will admit, he is one of the best drivers of all time, probably top 5 driver of all time. Isaac Hadjar, I think, is going to succeed. And yes, I'm aware Mercedes looks the best out of the teams. In terms of team production, Mercedes does look the best. However, Kimi Antonelli has not shown consistent results. He's pretty wishy-washy in terms of his success. And yes, he started stringing together a lot of good performances towards the end of the season. However, this is a new regulation. It's going to cause a lot of chaos, a lot of carnage, and I feel like experienced drivers are going to succeed better than young drivers. But in this case, I think that Isaac is going to perform better than Kimi because Isaac had consistent performances. He was consistently successful, whereas Kimi would have races where he would finish out of the points and then not. But Isaac, I felt, had a more consistent success, and I was not going to pick Franco Colapinto. I don't think Alpine's going to be very good. But that is my pick for best second driver. I believe my next one is biggest riser. Now, the way I'm wording this, biggest riser, is in terms of where they finished in the championship points wise. So however many points they scored in the last season, who increases, who has the most difference in their points. Now, Isaac Hadjar was a good possibility. Kimi Antonelli, less so, unless he goes gangbusters. George Russell. However, I think it will be Ollie Behrman. Now, Oliver Behrman is the driver for Haas. He has the number 87, and Haas has looked, after preseason testing, like they're going to be one of the top teams here in this next F1 season. And that is where I kind of lean towards, okay, Haas looking like they could be one of the better teams, not going to break into that upper echelon with Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes, or McLaren, but looks like they might be one of those top teams in the rest of the field. And Ollie Behrman put up some good point performances, but was not like a bottom feeder in terms of points. There was one other driver that I think had a really, really big chance of this. The two that were clear was like Isaac Hadjar and Oliver Behrman. The other is Pierre Gasly, because the Alpine looked much quicker this year, and he did not have a very good performance. However, I do think Oliver Behrman is going to be the biggest riser in terms of points and finishing position in the championship. I think he could finish top 10 in the championship, because I think he could dethrone his teammate Esteban Ocon as the number one driver in Haas, because I think he truly is the better driver, and I think this year, after the experience of a full F1 season and a better car, will outpace his teammate and outperform his teammate by a significant margin. The next one, I believe, is the best of the rest. Yes, so I have TGR Haas F1 team as the best of the rest in terms of performance. Now, what does best of the rest mean? Best of the rest means who is going to finish best out of those top 4 teams I listed, out of McLaren, Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari. The best of the rest used to be a 3-horse race where like the top 3 teams were Mercedes, Red Bull, and Ferrari, and McLaren was a part of the rest. But teams can break into that upper echelon with the right leadership and the right performance. And I think the team that's going to be the best of the rest this year is Haas, TGR Haas. Now you might wonder, okay, why do you think this? Well, Haas put on a very good performance. They've consistently been a good team. They are they are an older team now. They've finally kind of established themselves. They showed the best performance. They have a Ferrari power unit this year. And in terms of Mercedes power units, the teams that have the Mercedes power units outside of Mercedes and McLaren have not looked exceptionally fast. They haven't really gotten all that they can out of the car. So this is why I put Haas in my best of the rest category. This now leads me into who I think is going to win the Constructors' Championship. Now, the Constructors' Championship, for those who do not know, is the team who had the most championship points in the season. Now, there are 4 teams that look like they could be the team that gets this. Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull, and McLaren. Now, Red Bull was a team I thought about. But Isaac Hadjar, young driver, won't necessarily perform as well. And a lot of people are actually putting Mercedes up there, because Mercedes has shown to have a very quick car. However, my changes have been made because of the new addendum, where by June 1st, Formula One will test car compression ratio at both ambient and at 130 degrees Celsius. Long story short, the entire offseason was ruled by the fact that looked like Mercedes was going to be dominating because of a loophole where they were able to make their engine have a higher compression ratio of 18-1 when not at ambient temperatures, but the Formula One, the FIA, which is the governing body for Formula, is only measuring at ambient temperatures. So they would measure it would be 16-1, and then when they would get to temperature, they'd be 18-1. Now, teams obviously complained, and they petitioned, and with that petition, we then saw, okay, cool, Mercedes is going to have to change their engine by June 1st to where that measures. That includes all their other teams that are a part of this, including like McLaren and Alpine as the Mercedes power unit customers. And so with that, I'm kind of like, okay, maybe it's Mercedes. And then Ferrari looks the best in terms of a team that's not using this compression ratio kind of loophole. They look most comfortable out there. And they also have two of the best drivers. I think Charles Leclerc has been screwed as a result of Ferrari's strategy. And then they have the greatest driver of all time, Lewis Hamilton, there. So I think if anyone could get anything out of a car that maybe is not as super crazy powerful as Mercedes, it's Ferrari. But I didn't pick Ferrari either. I picked McLaren Formula One team, and you might be wondering why. Well, here's why. They have two number one drivers. They have the reigning world championship champion Lando Norris. They have Oscar Piastri, who is shown to be a top driver as of last year. He finished top 3 in the standings. Sure, did he struggle towards the end of the season? Yes, but he outperformed Lando in a couple of races outside of the Las Vegas Grand Prix where it was all but one. But Max Verstappen is crazy and was able to outperform them. But I think Piastri is going to come out firing this season. I think he's going to perform extremely well, and I think that we are going to see a step up from them. But I think McLaren is going to figure it out. They're going to be the most comfortable, the most consistent, and I think that consistency is going to be the thing that gets them over the line and in the constructors. And then finally, the Drivers' Championship. I'm now realizing that I've blocked it with this. 1 second.
Ooh.
My browser is, my timer's blocking the Drivers' Championship. The Drivers' Championship. Now, the Drivers' Championship is based off of personal performance. The Drivers' Championship has no impact on money, but has a lot of impact in terms of pride, and those are the things that people weigh when they look at who are the best drivers of all time. Look at World Championships. But there are some drivers that never won a World Championship that people still agree, hey, that was a good driver. But when we argue who's the best driver, you look at World Championships. And in third place, who I think is going to finish third in the Formula One Championship. I need to make sure I'm clicked on the right thing. I believe it is going to be McLaren driver Oscar Piastri. Now, why do I think Oscar Piastri is going to finish third? I think the McLaren is going to be a very competitive car. I also think that Lando Norris is going to have a good season, but I think Oscar is finally going to come into his own. This is one of his, I think this is his third or fourth season in Formula One. He's finally getting his footing in Formula One, and I think this is going to be the thing that where he kind of starts to come into his own. I think he's going to finish third in the rankings again, but I think he is going to outperform his world champion teammate, Lando Norris. Then this leads me to the number 2 driver. And I had a couple of ideas. I thought about Lando Norris, but obviously I didn't pick him. I could have picked either of the Ferraris, Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc. Really, both of them had a good reason to be up there. But I did not pick either of those drivers for number 2. I picked Max Verstappen. I have Max Verstappen finishing second in the Drivers' Championship. Now, most of you might figure out, okay, we know who Michael's going to pick. But for those of you who don't, I'm going to talk to you about who I think is going to be the number 1 driver. And that is the man, the myth, the legend, George Russell. Now, here's why I think George Russell is going to win the championship. 1, Mercedes is looking like the strongest team coming out the blocks with one of the fastest cars. I think George Russell is an exceptional driver. I think that he has beaten at times in the same car Lewis Hamilton, the greatest driver of all time. I think that George finally is going to be given a car by Mercedes that is a winner. That is one that can win championships. And he is not the number 2 anymore. He is the number 1 driver at his team. Mercedes is going to do everything in their power to give George Russell the championship that he needs. And I think it's going to come down to the wire. I think Max Verstappen's driving talent is going to keep him competitive, even though it's not necessarily the best car that he has. He's not going to have a super rocket ship. But Max Verstappen's going to give George a run for his money. And I'm going to explain to you why this Drivers' Championship, I think, is going to be one of the best Drivers' Championships we've seen in a long time. Because I think it's going to be one similar to Lewis Max back in 2021. And here's why. Max Verstappen, driving for Red Bull, is consistently showing that he is the best driver on the grid in terms of talent. Talent alone, he is the best driver on the grid. I can't... Sure, driver and car need to coexist. But if anyone has been able to perform with a crappy car, it's been Max Verstappen. He's been able to extract the most out of cars that are not as good. George Russell has shown to exceed expectations at times and perform well. And I think George right now is probably one of the top 5 is easily a top 5 driver in Formula One. And I think that he also talent-wise is one of the top 5 drivers. And right now he's looking like he's going to have the number 1 car from March till June, until when they have this change in the compression ratio measuring. So in that time, can he rack up enough of a championship lead to stave off Max Verstappen? Well, that's where I think he will succeed. I think he will show that his caliber of driving is Mr. Consistent. Early on in the season, he was consistently podium, 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 podium. It was a 1-2 for the McLarens, and we saw a podium from George Russell. George Russell is one of the most consistent drivers in Formula One. Now, Max also shows consistency, but there's crashes, there's things that happen, and I think that if anyone has a other teammate that will be competing for races and could help promote George Russell, it's going to be Kimi Antonelli. I think Kimi Antonelli will perform better points-wise than Isaac Hadjar, but may also be more in the mix, which could lead to George being able to use Kimi as a means of staving off Max Verstappen. We saw this exact thing happen last season. Lando Norris in Abu Dhabi was in 4th position. Yuki Tsunoda ahead of him in the 3rd position, and the Red Bulls wanted Yuki to defend. And Yuki did a very bad job, got a penalty, and through goes Lando Norris. I think if any driver could help defend, it would be Kimi Antonelli. And that is why, and I just saw the clock, I think George Russell is going to be the victor come Abu Dhabi this year. Okay, now we're going to go into Sector 3, my Melbourne predictions. Guys, we're moving up in terms of graphics. I put some effort into these. Yeah, you like it? You like it? Okay. Well, we're going to be starting with our Melbourne predictions. Now, the Australian Grand Prix is back as it's the first race. And this is something that's exciting. It's been the first race for a long time. Bahrain kind of dethroned it for a little bit, but I'm so excited for Melbourne and for the Australian Grand Prix to be back as the #1 first race. Now, right now, it's looking like there's not going to be rain, so it might not be as chaotic as it was last year. But let's get into it. Now, who do I think is going to be the disaster class? Who do I think is going to perform the worst here in Melbourne? That's going to be Aston Martin. Now, I explained some of it in the championship predictions, but Aston Martin is looking like one of the worst teams right now in terms of car performance. They went with the Honda power unit, and Honda hates Fernando Alonso. For some reason, Fernando Alonso cannot perform in Honda cars. Honda cars have the worst reliability issues when it is with Fernando Alonso. You want to know how I know this? A while back, McLaren was a customer of the Honda power unit. And driving for McLaren at the time was Fernando Alonso. And Fernando Alonso had some of the worst reliability issues. I have vivid memories of the McLaren sitting on the side of the road, engine smoking, with Fernando Alonso stepping out of that car. So, Fernando Alonso has performed poorly with the Honda power unit, but why I put the whole team? Normally this can be a driver or a team decision, but I put the whole team because there are rumors that they could not even finish. They could not even start the race on Saturday. They need the distance, but there are conversations that I think for sure this season, or this next race, this first race, we're going to see 21-22 Aston Martin. That is why I think they're going to be the disaster class of the season. I think they're going to finish last in qualifying, last in every free practice, and last in the race. So that is why I have them as disaster class. And then next up, I have, to contrast that, who do I think is going to put on a master class? Who do I think is going to perform the best in terms of their car production, in terms of position finishing? Who do I think is going to perform the best? And I have Sir Lewis Hamilton driving for Scuderia Ferrari. I think that Lewis Hamilton is going to put on a masterclass. People have started underrating Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton is the greatest driver of all time. Not one of, the greatest driver of all time. If not for some FIA shenanigans in Abu Dhabi 2021, he would have 8 drivers' championships. And I know he had a bad season last season, but Scuderia screwed Ferrari strategy screwed him over. And I think that if anyone could perform in this Australian Grand Prix, truly take their step up, be like, this is my team now. Let me see some performance. Let me see some success in this team. It's going to be Sir Lewis Hamilton with the Ferrari, and I think he's going to put on a masterclass here in Melbourne. And sure, Mercedes looks like the far and away best team, but I think if anyone could extract a car could be able to put on a performance, it is Lewis Hamilton. So many people have Charles over Lewis, but I think Lewis this year is going to prove why he is the greatest of all time. Next up, I believe, I'm trying to remember what I have. I can't remember my presentation, but next up we have my points surprise. Who do I think is going to get into the points that is like a surprise? Someone who might not necessarily normally get into the points. This is typically going to be reserved for the bottom 6 teams. So anyone from the bottom 6 teams. Currently, right now, the top 4 teams are McLaren, McLaren, Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes. So outside of Haas, because I do expect Haas to get in the points, who do I think is going to be surprising? And I think it's going to be Arvid Lindblad. Now, Arvid Lindblad is the only true rookie. Franco Colapinto is listed as a rookie. He is not a rookie. Don't let anyone lie to you. They are trying to make him the rookie. He's not the rookie. Arvid Lindblad is the only rookie this season. Franco Colapinto has 24 race starts. Or 22 race starts in his career. And he's listed as a rookie because the rules of Formula 1, I'm just going to quickly rant. The rules of Formula 1, being a rookie means that it was your first season as the starting. You start as the driver, that's what makes you a rookie, is if it's your first race that beginning of the year. So Franco Colapinto is considered a rookie this year, even though he raced almost the entirety of last season, and he raced for Williams later on in the previous season. But I digress. Arvid Lindblad, I think, is going to get into the points in his first Formula 1 race of his entire career. And why do I think about this? Why do I think that Arvid Lindblad could possibly do this? Well, his agent is one of the best Formula E drivers. And this current regulation seems to be a lot about energy management. You want to know what drivers in all the racing series really know how to energy manage? It'd be Formula E drivers. And currently, one of the best Formula E drivers is Arvid Lindblad's manager. And I think Arvid Lindblad has the talent. He got rushed through by the Red Bull system to get him in here. They're talking about him like a prodigy, like Max Verstappen. And of that caliber. And I think that if anyone could extract everything they need out of this car, be able to energy manage properly, eke their way into the points in that 10 spot, I think it's going to be Arvid Lindblad as my point surprise for this week. Next up, I have my first lap hero. Now I'm going to explain the first lap hero category. First lap hero is who I think is going to gain the most positions in the first lap. That means that if they started in 18th place and they move their way to 13th place, that's a 5-position gain. I think that means that you're the first lap hero. That also means that I could have the first lap 0. I don't have that category, but I might add that category. We'll see. But why do I think Nico Hülkenberg is going to be the first lap hero? Well, Audi has shown that they're a pretty decent team, but also Nico Hülkenberg has considerably shown success in this team. And I think that if anyone could extract the most out of that first lap, make their way through the chaos, and weave his way through some of the younger drivers figuring out this thing, I think it could be Nico Hülkenberg. I think he is an exceptional driver. I think that the Audi could be a good car, and I think that if anyone is going to gain the most positions, it's going to be Nico Hülkenberg. The only way I don't think this happens is if we see a really bad qualifying from someone in not in the Aston Martin camp, but someone out of those top 4 teams, like a Lando Norris or an Oscar Piastri. Oh, Oscar got knocked out in Q2 and then moves his way up to 6th place because, of course, he does. But that gets me to my point. I think Nico Hülkenberg is going to be my first lap hero. He's going to gain the most positions in the first lap. That then leads me to my team of the week. And I have Scuderia Ferrari as my team of the week. Now you might wonder, Michael, why do you have them as team of the week? Team of the week, and this is how I'm determining team of the week, is what team performed the best par their standard. And for the first race, this is how I'm determining it, because we don't know the standard, we don't know where teams fall. I have Scuderia Ferrari because I think that they're going to perform the best in terms of points scored as a whole with their team. I think that Lewis and Lewis and Charles are going to finish combined with the most championship points of the race weekend. And I know it's shocking because everyone's putting on their high horse with Mercedes, but I don't necessarily expect Kimi Antonelli to perform very well. And I also don't expect Isaac Hadjar to perform very well. But if I think the veterans, in terms of number one drivers, and in terms of the teams that have shown success, I'm putting my money on the Scuderia Ferrari. Next, I have pole position. Who do I think is going to get number one in the qualifying? I think it is going to be George Russell. I'm realizing I should really put the animation so that way it kind of amps it up. But I have George Russell finishing in pole position. Why do I think this? Well, the Mercedes looked significantly faster than any other car in testing. I think in a one-lap race, we see the Mercedes perform the best. I think that George Russell is going to finish number one on Saturday and get in that pole position. Pole position, also for those who do not know, is who qualified the fastest. Essentially, the way the qualifying works in Formula One is you have 3 qualies. So you have Q1, Q2, and Q3. Every movement you drop the lowest 5. I'm not sure how that's going to look in the new format with 22 teams. I think they might drop the lowest 7 or lowest 6 and then move their way up to 10. Q3 you have 10 drivers. Whoever gets the fastest lap time in Q3 gets pole position. And I think that that's going to be George Russell. George Russell has shown some exceptional driving in one-lap performances, and I think that his car right now is easily the best of the season. Now, my podium lock. Who do I think am I going to stamp as this is who I think is going to finish on the podium come Sunday next week? Or Saturday. Technically, it's Saturday night for me. Sorry. In Central Standard Time, it's at 10 p.m. So for those of you in other time zones, this is the week to watch Formula One, because it's not at some random time like 4 a.m. It's at 10 p.m. It's a night race for you. So, my podium lock. In the third position, Max Verstappen as my third driver. Max Verstappen consistently performs well. Just regardless. No matter what, he performs exceptionally. And that's why I have Max Verstappen finishing third. I think the Red Bull is a good car. Not the best car. I think it's probably the third best car from what we saw in testing, maybe the fourth. And what I will also explain is this prediction, I'm working off of nothing. I am working off of, we drove 160 laps, and hopefully that gives you an idea on a specific track in Bahrain. I don't know. I'm just telling you this right now. This is me working off of scraps. I could not tell you who is going to finish best. There's teams that have sandbagged and trained in testing. Regardless, I think Max Verstappen is going to finish third on the podium. Now, who do I have finishing second? That would be the T-pose man himself, George Russell. Yes, I think that he might get pole position, but I think he's going to lose a couple spots in that start. I think he's not going to perform as well. I think he is going to drop back. Maybe strategy, maybe a bad pit stop, maybe an unlucky safety car. In some way, I think he's going to end up second. And you might ask, Michael, who do you have at number 1? Who do you think is going to stand atop in the first race of the season? I think this man has been off the podium far too long. I think this man deserves to be it. There's a reason he is called the greatest of all time. There's a reason he won 7 world championships. And yes, that's true. I have Lewis Hamilton winning the Australian Grand Prix. Here's my logic for this, because I know that some of you are going to be like, what on earth are you talking about? How is Lewis Hamilton going to be number 1? Well, I would like to remind you, Lewis Hamilton has now driven in multiple regulations. This is, I believe, his 4th. Now, and I'm defining that by eras, because he drove pre-hybrid era. He was one of the most dominant drivers in the hybrid era. Then we got to the ground effect era, which was dominated by Max Verstappen, and now we have this new era, which is probably going to be referred to as the energy management era. But who has performed well in every single one of those eras? It is Lewis Hamilton. And I think that Lewis Hamilton is finally going to reclaim his spot atop the podium and win in Australia this week. My reasoning and thought behind this, 1, I put him as masterclass, so I'm putting all my eggs in the basket of Lewis Hamilton's going to succeed. And also, getting into it further, I think Ferrari won't bottle the strategy this week, and I think that in Australia, this is a track that Lewis is one of the most winningest drivers on this track. He has consistently won on this track. He knows this track like the back of his hand. He is one of the greatest drivers of all time, as I have consistently reiterated. And I think that he is going to finally extract out of this Ferrari what he has not been able to extract from the Ferrari previously. And I think Ferrari's going to finally give him a good car. And I think that he's going to beat Charles Leclerc throughout this season. That is one of my biggest hot takes, is that I think that Lewis Hamilton is going to score more points in this championship than Charles Leclerc. And I think this is the start of it. We're going to see Lewis Hamilton top the driver's standings after the first week, and then we'll see where everything else falls. Because this season is going to be chaos. A regulation change is one of the craziest things. And again, these are just predictions. I could be completely wrong. This podium could be completely wrong. We could have 3 drivers that I did not list on here on the podium. We could have Lando Norris win this race. We could have Oscar Piastri win his home Grand Prix. We could see Valtteri Bottas. I'm joking. We're not going to see Valtteri Bottas on the podium. Boy, would that be a dream. But I'm going to go into the outro here. As the clock winds down, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. This has been Track Time, my very first Track Time. And I am so excited to be able to continue this journey with you, go through Formula One. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Formula One, teach you and introduce you to Formula One. And for those of you who are longtime veterans, I hope you get to hear my takes, hear my either terrible takes or my brilliant takes. But either way, that has been Track Time. It's been an absolute pleasure. Good evening and good night.